Two balls and a strike to count on Taylor. Reyes fires, swinging a drive, deep left field. It's his way back. Walk the ball. Chris Taylor.
What's up, everyone? Welcome into DodgerHeads Live, presented by DodgerBlue.com, part of the Blue Wire Podcast Network. My name is Jeff Spiegel, joined today by DodgerBlue.com editor Matthew Moreno. Matt, it's a weird start to the season for Dodger fans. Not what we're accustomed to as we sit here today following a loss on Sunday. We're going to get into all sorts of stuff, but the Dodgers are 500. Is it time to panic yet, Matt?
I won't say it's time to panic yet, but there are growing signs for concern. I think, heading into the season, we all agreed that there were question marks surrounding this team. And like I've expressed, in some of our other shows, I think, what's been interesting is the Dodgers being 500 or around 500 hasn't necessarily surprised me on a personal level, but it's how they've sort of gotten there. Like I thought it would be more of, oh, well, actually, maybe James Outman wasn't necessarily ready for this bigger role. Maybe Miguel Vargas wasn't ready to handle second base on a daily basis. But those guys, for the most part, have been fine, if not better than fine. It's been, Chris Taylor's still struggling. Max Muncy aside, I know we'll get into it later. Max Muncy, aside from a hot streak in San Francisco, has basically struggled this season. And now, Mookie Betts is kind of inconsistent. Freddie Freeman's had a bad weekend, and so it's how they've gotten there that's been surprising. And with that, that's where I think my level of concern comes from, because the guys that you were counting on aren't doing what you were expecting them to do.
Yeah, as we sit here and record, and I know a bunch of folks are joining us live on YouTube and on Facebook. We appreciate you. For those joining us after the fact on YouTube or listening to the podcast on Google, Spotify, or Apple, thank you for joining us as well. But as we sit here on a Sunday night, the Dodgers are currently 8-8. Here's some good news, Matt. They are just one game back of the Arizona Diamondbacks in the NL West. They're actually a half game up on the San Diego Padres, who are 8-9. They're 2 games up on the San Francisco Giants. So they do have that going for us. But here's the plan for tonight. I want to talk a little bit about the week that just was. We're going to talk about the offense. I think that's the biggest storyline, so we'll get into that. We'll talk about Will Smith and the latest updates on his health, obviously headed to the injured list. We'll talk about Cody Bellinger, his first turn back in Los Angeles, eventful on and off the field, it sounds like, if you've been following social media and heard some of those stories. And then we'll do a big edition of Stock Up and Stock Down. Over the last week, 2 weeks, who are some guys who maybe are ascending? You mentioned Max Muncy, as well as some other guys who maybe there's some serious concerns or some slumps happening. So let's talk about the last week. Dodgers go 3-3 this week, Matt. It starts off a week ago. You and I were sitting here. The Dodgers had just lost 3 in a row to the Arizona Diamondbacks. The panic question, the alarms were going off everywhere, but they rebound. They head to San Francisco. They take 2 out of 3 against the Giants. Things are starting to look up. They're coming home, day off, and then 3 against the Cubs. Well, they drop 2 out of 3 to the Cubs. And again, I said it, the main story is the Dodgers offense. And talk about a Jekyll and Hyde group, because they played 6 games this week and scored 2 or fewer runs in 4 of those 6. But when I look at the standings, Matt, the Dodgers have scored 85 runs, which is second in the National League behind only the Braves. And so they score 18 runs in the games that they win, and they score basically no runs in the games that they lose. It's very bipolar. But what do you make of the Dodgers offense? Let me rewind that and ask the question this way. Do you agree? Is the Dodgers offense kind of the main storyline, the thing that you are most interested in or intrigued by over the past week or 2?
That's tough. I mean, I think I'm inclined to say yes, and I think some of that is just offense is what everybody tends to sort of focus on, because it's kind of in your face when it's going great. Everybody loves it, and when runners are getting left on base, like you always remember, oh, the Dodgers left 10 on base the other night, but you're not going to necessarily remember the one game where they left 3 on base and they won, 15-4, whatever the case may be. I would, if it's not the lineup that I'm most concerned about, I would put the bullpen in that cat up in that discussion. But I will run with a lineup question. And I think what's a little ironic is the offense this year has, I think, been sort of the boom or bust perception and narrative that has been slapped on the Dodgers for several years. And there were seasons where, yes, they were a little bit more reliant on home runs, but they still were doing, some of the smaller things. And ironically, this Dodgers team showed some of that in one of their early comeback wins when it was based off of walks and base hits. But now that, aside from, a solo home run from Chris Taylor or Max Muncy going crazy up in Oracle. Like there isn't, a ton of offense kind of consistently happening.
Yeah. What's interesting is, as bad as the bullpen has been, there haven't been many games, if any, where the bullpen has kind of squandered a lead. There have been games where it was close and then the bullpen prevented it from remaining close, but it feels like most of the time the Dodgers offense has failed to come up. This is interesting. Let me read you the run totals in Dodger victories this season. 8, 10, 13, 5, 5, 9, 10, and 2. That's the amount of runs they've scored in their wins. Now, when you look at the losses, 1, 1, 3, 8, 6, 0, 2, and 2. And so obviously scoring more runs, more likely to win, scoring less runs, more likely to lose. But when the Dodgers have scored runs, like 5 or more runs, they're 8-2. And so 5 runs is not a big number, Matt. Like that's not a number that feels like it should be impossible for a team like this. And so I think that's the question. Now, just look at this weekend's games against the Cubs. Let me run through some of these numbers because I think it highlights this. So going back to Friday's game, the Dodgers lose. They had just 3 hits. Now, you want to talk about hitting with runners in scoring position? Don't look at Friday. The Dodgers had 0 at-bats with runners in scoring position on Friday. They scored 2 runs, a pair of solo home runs. They walked just 1 time. So 4 base runners on Friday. They lose that one. On Saturday, they come back. They win this one. They go 1 for 6 with runners in scoring position. The one was the game-winning hit from David Peralta. They had 5 hits in the game, but only 2 of them were prior to the 9th inning. So they finished with 5 hits. 3 of them come in the game-winning 9th inning. And then Sunday's game this afternoon, they go 2 for 7 with runners in scoring position. That doesn't sound that bad. But if you watched the game, you would know that one of those was a JD Martinez infield single that didn't score anyone. And the other was a Mookie Betts fly ball that was lost in the sun and was not qualified as an error. So take an infield single that probably was an error and didn't score anyone and a dropped fly ball in right field. The Dodgers had 0 hits with runners in scoring position. They leave 9 guys on base. Freddie Freeman, who we'll talk about, was 0 for 3 with runners in scoring position. And so on one hand, you say, hey, they had 12 base runners today. That's an improvement. Some of those were result of errors or nearly errors. And so I'm just looking at those 3 games against a Cubs team. Jamison Taillon was on the mound for one of these. I mean, you just had guys on the mound that it's like 5 runs should not be difficult to come by at home. And the Dodgers lineup just couldn't produce.
Yeah. I mean, I agree. Like on the surface saying, can the Dodgers score 5 runs? I think you would probably say yes. But then again, like when you start looking at their lineup and especially, now, the 3-game Will Smith, the Cubs series specifically, Will Smith didn't play in any of it. And I know we'll get into, his concussion issue later. But he has been the Dodgers' best hitter all season. Definitely their most consistent. His heading into today, Trace Thompson still had the edge on, I think, OPS because of his barrage early in the year. But really, you're now taking, again, like Chris Taylor's inconsistent, Max Muncy. So as much as 5 runs, they should be able to do it. If you look at who the names are in their lineup, I absolutely agree. But then when you boil it down to like the production they're actually getting from these guys, like 5 runs is, sort of a lot, like not a stretch, but if like the Dodgers get 5 runs, like kind of multiple things sort of need to go right. And again, when you take Will Smith out of the equation, then it just creates an even bigger issue because, Austin Barnes, he's obviously his, hitting struggles are well documented.
Wow. That was the most negative thing. That was the most negative thing you've ever said about Austin Barnes, I think.
He got on the board Sunday. But yeah, I mean, it's tough sledding for the entire lineup. And I think, I think Mookie Betts might have been the one who described, they've been consistently inconsistent. And that's, well said.
What's interesting, Matt, is I said it a couple of minutes ago. They are 2nd in the National League in runs scored. Like, on paper, like when you look at the big picture and you say, hey, this is going to average itself out, scoring 10 runs one night and 2 the next, like that's not necessarily how it's going to play out. At some point, it's going to be 7 and 5, and you're going to go 2-0 instead of 1 and 1. Like, so I guess part of me, we're playing the results of the fact that they've scored, like I think I said, 2 runs or fewer in 4 of their last 6 games and saying, oh my gosh, the offense, it's a nightmare. As people in the chat have mentioned, Chris Taylor, Austin Barnes, Miguel Rojas, putting those 3 guys at the bottom of a lineup is not a recipe for turning the lineup over quickly or getting to Mookie Betts and Freddie Freeman with guys on. That was one of the things. Gavin Lux hitting 9th last year and hitting almost 300 for much of it. I mean, that was a big deal. And yet, is it possible, Matt, that we're just playing the results a little too much? We're looking at a small sample size and saying, look, I know they struggled to score in 4 out of these 6, but big picture, they've scored 87 runs on the season. You do the math, that's an average of more than 5 per game. Like, is it possible we're just reacting to some of these low scoring games and freaking out about something that maybe we shouldn't, and that this offense is actually going to be fine? Or do you think there is a fatal flaw in how bad maybe that 7, 8, and 9 are on days when Will Smith isn't catching?
Yeah, that's the biggest thing. Is I think it's more my concern. Like, is it possible for it to average out? Sure, but I wouldn't go so far right now to say it's likely. And it's very much of, like we discussed with Chris Taylor when he was kind of struggling in spring training. Like, yes, it's just spring training, but also this is an extension of basically what we saw, last year. And now here we are in the regular season. It's basically the same thing that we saw from Chris Taylor in 2022. And so that would be my concern, because if he doesn't come around, if Max Muncy is still inconsistent, if, Miguel Rojas, continues to kind of be, more of a defensive shortstop, where is that production going to eventually come from? Because, they got to, it was 85 or 89 runs, whatever their total is this season.
Yeah.
Also with Trace Thompson hitting 3 home runs in one game, one of them being a grand slam. So like that, my concern is, this team this year, this iteration, like sort of is kind of the boomer bust that everybody always says the Dodgers are, which I thought was a little unfair. And that's just, that's where my concern is again. And I don't want to, get too repetitive, but it's just like, I'm not fully convinced that these guys are going to, unfortunately all kind of get it going, or enough of them are going to get it going for the lineup to really smooth out.
Yeah. So, and I mean, I think what I'm hearing you say is there's a team that's scoring 7.5, 8 runs a game in victories, and a team that's scoring about 3 runs a game in losses. You're saying if you had to put your chips on one of those two, and which of those is maybe more representative of the team that you're looking at, it sounds like you're more in the pessimistic side and closer to the, hey, I think we're in the 3 to 4 runs a game of offense is what we're looking at, rather than the average it out and we're getting 6 to 7 runs a game. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, that's definitely fair. I mean, I would even say, 3 to 5 runs on average, I think I could see them doing. But I definitely, right now, I'm not comfortable saying, yes, they'll eventually start averaging 6+ runs a game. I don't see that right now. And I don't think I'm being like prisoner of the moment, 16 games. And I'm looking at it from, what we've seen from a lot of these guys now for at least one season, if not longer.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would say too, like, if you want to be on the optimistic side and say, hey, this will all figure itself out, like, where is improvement going to come from? You mentioned it. Outman and Vargas have not been the problem. I know Vargas's average is something that isn't awesome. His on-base percentage has been great. If you look at his batted ball quality, he's going to be fine. He's the least of their problems compared to a lot of things. Will Smith has been very good. Freddie Freeman has been very good, even if he struggled the last week. Mookie Betts has been very good. And even Max Muncy is second in the league in home runs. And so you kind of look at the top of the order, and you've got your 4 best hitters, that, with Muncy being number 4, who have all been pretty good. You've got Outman and Vargas, who are 5 and 6 everyday players. Even JD Martinez, I know there's some people in the chat that aren't happy because he's batting 3rd. If JD Martinez eventually gets moved down to like the 6 or 7 spot in the lineup, I think you're going to be fine with the offensive production you get out of JD Martinez. It's at least a competent at bat. But the question is like, not all those guys are kind of at what you would expect them to be at in a good day. There's not a whole lot of room for Freddie Freeman to do a lot better, or Max Muncy to do a lot better than they have been. Whereas there's probably some room for some of those guys to regress. Like, I think James Outman's coming back down to earth. As much as I love James Outman, he's not going to OPS 1.4 for the entire season. Miguel Vargas isn't going to have a 550 on base percentage for the whole season. And so if anything, it feels like some of those guys are going to come back down to earth. I don't see improvement from Rojas coming. I don't see improvement from Barnes coming. I don't see improvement from Taylor coming, or Thompson, or Hayward, or, on and on. It feels like it's not like you can point to, well, Mookie's hitting 200 and Freddie's hitting 200 and they'll figure it out. Those guys are already playing well. So that would be my concern. I would say for myself, I tend to still fall on it'll all even itself out if the Dodgers can remain somewhat healthy. their 1 through 7 is pretty good. And then you throw your shortstop, and one of your outfielders down at the bottom, and you don't love those 2 spots in the order, but 1 through 7 are going to be very good. The Dodgers will acquire some depth. I trust that eventually Michael Busch will be up. Some of these guys will start to come up and fortify the bench. So I tend to be on the more optimistic side, which is maybe not surprising, but that's where I land. I asked you a quick question, Matt, and then I answered my own question with like a 5-minute soliloquy. So I apologize about that. Let's do this. Let's get to a couple of the news items before we get back into individual players. I think the biggest storyline of the weekend is Will Smith to the injured list with a concussion. When it was announced Friday night that after a day off, he was not playing, I went to Twitter and started freaking out because of his usage. And then it turned out to be for nothing because he was sick. And then Saturday, he wasn't feeling well and they were going to run tests. And I started to be like, what are we doing here? Are we testing for the flu? Like, what's going on? Sunday, he goes on the 7-day IL for concussions. I don't think, Matt, it's been confirmed he has a concussion. It was like concussion-like symptoms. He passed the concussion test, but he took 3 balls off the mask on Wednesday against the Giants. That's believed to be where this comes from. So you fill in the gaps there. Will Smith, 7-day IL, retroactive to Thursday or Friday?
Thursday. So then it was retroactive to April 13th, Thursday, and he is eligible to come back now on Thursday because they backdated it. And, I apologize because you're asking me to fill in the gaps. Honestly, there isn't a whole lot to fill in because the Dodgers, the way they've handled this entire situation was just very strange. And, Dave Roberts, when he first discussed why Will Smith wasn't in the lineup, he said it's an illness. Like, he's just not feeling well. It's not physical. It's like sick type thing, which, okay, like, it made sense. He said, I hope he's back in the lineup Saturday, which, okay, like that checks out. Like players get sick. Michael Grove pitched through what it has since been revealed as strep throat in his first start, and he kind of felt it still in his second start. So fine. Then Smith wasn't in the lineup Saturday, and I thought, okay, like, it's happened in the past where Dave Roberts gets a little too optimistic on when guys may be back. So, surely he'll be, back on Sunday. But then after Saturday's game, that's when Dave said, hey, let me back up. Again, when he discussed Will Smith not being in the lineup on Saturday, he said, it's not a physical issue. It's not a tissue injury. Then after Saturday's game, he said, we're going to have to run tests to diagnose what's going on. He's still not doing great. So then I start thinking, okay, like, what the heck is going on? Like,
right. What are we running tests on?
Yeah. You ruled out a physical issue. You ruled out a tissue thing. So is it muscular? Like, and I saw Will Smith leaving that night, like right after Dave Roberts was done speaking in the interview room, then we were going to walk in the clubhouse. So Will Smith walked past me and he looked okay. And so I thought, okay, he's there. Like, you're not going to test him for like COVID. Like, you're not going to have him around and, not knowing if he's, contagious or anything. So just that and I tweeted that night, like, look, just kind of deducing what's going on. Like, maybe it's a concussion. Like, that's the only thing I could come to. But then I also felt like, why would he be at the stadium, right? Like, if you kind of have that, they want to maybe isolate you type thing. So just a very strange situation. Obviously, I hope Will, makes a quick recovery just for his, aside from the team angle, just on a personal level. But yeah, I mean, it was just very odd how the whole thing kind of unfolded and, the messaging that was sent out. And then, it ends up being a concussion. And I see, we're getting some comments about, I think, Dave Roberts lying earlier.
I like this one from Anna. Good thing he lied. That's why David Ross didn't change pitchers and also didn't intentionally walk David Peralta because he seemed to believe that Austin Barnes would get pinch hit from. Obviously, he didn't, and Peralta hits the game-winning single. But, Matt, you would say there that he was probably more afraid of Austin Barnes and his clutch bat and just the power that he contains, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think if the Cubs intentionally walk David Peralta, all that's going to happen is Austin Barnes hits a walk-off grand slam. I mean, we've seen him run into home runs before, so of course that was going to be the case. But in all seriousness, I can't believe the Cubs didn't do that because I would have forced the Dodgers. Like, if you do that and Will Smith beats you, then okay, we forced their hand and Will Smith ended up being available. Like, we lost. I mean, yeah. Anyway.
Yeah. The issue with Will Smith is we just spent all this time talking about the offense and. Obviously, I'll say this, concussions are scary stuff. Like, and you never know how a guy is going to respond. Clearly he passed the concussion test, but then didn't feel well. Some people were speculating, it could be like a vertigo type of a situation. So who knows? Weird stuff, weirdly described by Dave Roberts, but there is a world where Dave Roberts' description is sort of accurate. He passed the concussion test, so he couldn't really say he had a concussion. Now they do. So whatever. But again, as it relates to the Dodgers, Austin Barnes, whatever you think about Austin Barnes, he's been terrible so far this season. He's 1 for 19. You mentioned it, got a single today. So he is now in 20 at bats or 20 plate appearances. He has 1 single and 1 walk. That's it. They signed a guy named Austin Wynns today. He flew in, immediately joined the team. He has 182 career major league games, a 609 OPS. I'll have to double check. That might be higher than Barnes's OPS. I'm just kidding. That was a joke. But I mean, that's a problem for a team that is struggling offensively to take Will Smith, who's arguably the best offensive catcher in baseball, and replace him with the guy that is 1 for 19, isn't throwing anybody out from behind the plate. I mean, there's like pitch framing is maybe the only thing that Austin Barnes is bringing to the table that Will Smith in a better way. The Dodgers are in a pinch from a catching position right now.
Yeah, and I think this kind of ties into, the point that we were discussing I don't remember if it was one of our shorter videos or a long form on a Sunday night of in the past, the Dodgers had the lineup depth and talent to withstand, I'll use Cody Bellinger specifically just because that's who was, kind of going through it, to have, somebody struggling at the bottom of the lineup. They don't have that luxury right now. And they definitely don't have that luxury when it's multiple people who are basically, I don't want to say an easy out, but not the most challenging at bat, I guess, if you will. And yeah, I mean, it's, again, like you said, concussions, you as much as Will Smith past testing. I mean, who knows? He's obviously not feeling well. The hope is he's back on Thursday, but if he's not, like, this could end up being, becoming kind of a dire situation for the Dodgers on a baseball level.
Well, let's talk about the question I see lots of folks asking in the chat, and it's related to the Dodgers' top prospect, Diego Cartaya. People asking Michael asks, why is he on the 40-man roster if he's not going to be called up? He is on the 40-man roster. Dave Roberts has said they don't want him to be brought up if he's not going to play. He's obviously a long ways away from the major leagues as well. I mean, like the issue with the answer of, well, we want him to play every day is, I mean, you could play him every day at the major league level, Dave. That's allowed. Austin Barnes isn't exactly crushing it. So offensively, it's not going to be any worse than what we're getting right now. Are you surprised they haven't gone there? I mean, it feels like a stretch, but as bad as Barnes has been, it kind of just makes me wonder, like, is there any point at which they would make that call? Or because he's already on the 40-man. That's the piece to me that at least lends me to believe, I don't know, maybe you think about it for at least 30 seconds.
And maybe they did, but I don't see that happening. I mean, Cartaya has played, unless I'm not sure if he was in the Drillers lineup today, but heading into Sunday, he had played 5 games with Tulsa. That was the highest level. Double A is the highest level he's been at in his career. Yeah. And, if some of our viewers didn't catch it when we were discussing in spring training, remember at one point I had Diego Cartaya's stock as down because Will Smith and Austin Barnes were both gone to the WBC, and Cartaya really he wasn't making starts. Like, he wasn't really in the conversation. And so for me, like, him possibly coming up because Will Smith was going to be potentially going on the IL, we didn't know the specifics yet. Like, it wasn't a realistic possibility that I thought they would do. Maybe if he had played at Double A last year, like a full season or half a season at Double A, then he was already on the 40-man roster. Maybe they consider that now, but the odds were definitely stacked against him in this specific situation. What I will say is I am surprised that they went outside of the organization, just because, Austin Wynns, he's not somebody, in my opinion, who's necessarily like, he's going to get cut.
He's going to get cut in a week, Matt. You could just flat out say it. He's getting DFA'd. It's in 7 days.
Potentially. But he's not maybe a veteran catcher who has had, like a Carlos Ruiz, like when the Dodgers traded for him, right? Like a few years ago, that made sense. And so that was a little surprising to me, but if you don't want to bring up Fiducia or Mazika, I think is how you pronounce the other catcher at AAA, like because of potential DFA issues, like I guess I get it. But again, and certainly the Dodgers are hoping Will Smith is back on Thursday, but concussion symptoms, if it is some case of like vertigo, like that stuff can linger. You don't necessarily know what's going to happen. And so, you could find yourself in a situation where, you're having to rely on a Barnes Wynns duo more than you originally anticipated.
I thought you were going to say more than you hoped. And I was like, one game is more than I hoped for a Barnes wins. But, people asking, why aren't they calling up Fiducia? He's crushing it, yada, yada. That's the answer. They would have to add him to the 40-man, which they clear a spot by moving Alex Reyes to the 60-day IL. They'd have to add him to the 40-man. And then he, basically send him back down afterwards. And now all of a sudden you got 4 catchers on the 40-man roster, or you DFA him, in which case you would likely lose him. The Dodgers looking at this and saying, hey, look, we could retroactively do this with Will Smith all the way back to Thursday. He could be back on Thursday, meaning basically Wins could potentially play Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, 4 days on the roster. And then we could DFA him, and there's no harm, no foul. We've got the open 40-man roster spot for when guys start to get healthy, et cetera, et cetera. And so that's the reason. I mean, I think Wins, they're saying might start one game when you got the day game after a night game kind of a deal, but that's going to be it. And so, look, I mean, the guy has 182 major league games in his career. He's not very good, but he's fine. He'll be competent for one game. You won't notice a drop-off from Austin Barnes. I can assure you of that, at least not offensively. So that's the reason for that. So hopefully Will Smith gets healthy, returns back on Thursday, because not only could the Dodgers offense use him, but, behind the plate as well. He's had himself an okay season defensively as well. Let's do one other story before we get to stock up and stock down, and that's an old friend returning to Los Angeles. Cody Bellinger turning back the clock, Matt. A home run halfway up the pavilion. We've got a home run robbing grab of Jason Hayward in the first game. We've got him forgetting to leave his parents' tickets to come to the game. I mean, it was the full Cody Bellinger experience on his return.
Yeah, it was. That sums it up very, very well. He mixed in a double, I think, stolen base. On a personal level, he had. If you look past the mishap with the tickets for his parents, he had a very good weekend being back at Dodger Stadium, and I think it was good. I think he genuinely, obviously, enjoyed his time here, and he said it like it didn't end with the Dodgers the way anybody would have guessed or wanted, obviously. And he was even asked, did you envision yourself at some point finishing your career with the Dodgers? And he said, yeah, then, things happen. But he looks to be, in a good place mentally, physically, I think, as well. And so that's good for him. And the fans, I thought, gave him, the appropriate treatment. There was a nice tribute video that the Dodgers played, and we have it recorded. So if you missed it, once we're done here, just stay on our YouTube channel, just scroll back a little bit through the post-game interviews and you'll find it. I mean, it was nice. And, I will say too, it was funny when, once he robbed Jason Hayward, then at that point, fans were like, okay, because Bellinger was applauded, was cheered for, every at bat, anytime his name was called. But the minute he robbed Hayward, then it was like, okay, we're done with you. Like, you're on the other team now. Like, this is it. Because then he got booed the rest of the weekend, which I thought was kind of funny.
Yeah, so he finishes 3 for 11, a home run, 2 walks, 2 strikeouts, the robbed home run, as you mentioned. That's what I was going to ask, is kind of what the fan reception was. It sounds like it was almost unanimously a positive reception until he started robbing home runs and hitting home runs. Is that accurate?
Yeah, so obviously, as soon as the tribute video started, there were some cheers, and everybody watched it. It ended. Bellinger tipped his cap. Some people, a little bit of a standing ovation, but definitely full cheers. And then you saw his first at bat. He got another, mini standing ovation, and he got a pitch timer violation because of it. And so then every at bat after that, same thing. And I thought, this is kind of interesting. Are they going to do it throughout the entire weekend? Then on Saturday, when he was announced during lineup introduction, same thing. He got cheered for, but then, like I said, he robbed Hayward. The boo started right away. He kind of laughed. He stretched his arms out, looking like, what am I supposed to do type thing. Yeah. But I mean, it wasn't and apologies to our guy, Scott. It wasn't Carlos Correa level booing for Bellinger. It was more just, you're on the other team and we're going to boo you now.
Yeah. Yeah. I reminded, as we were having this conversation, I smiled because I don't know if you saw Bill Plaschke's article at all about Bellinger in the LA Times. This quote, this was a blunder, Cody Bellinger not being retained. This was a blunder along the lines of the breakup of Lakers Kobe Bryant and Shaquille O'Neal. That was a real quote comparing the departure of Cody Bellinger to the splitting up of Shaq and Kobe. He also phrased, there's no way a former most valuable player and rookie of the year should have to be dumped by a team in the prime of his career, as if 2021 and 2022. I mean, it was just, I am pro Cody Bellinger. He's the only former player who's got his bobblehead still on the top besides Gagne. Gagne's up there too because he's a legend. I like Cody Bellinger's really bad the last 2 years. I've said it. 2020 is the greatest season in Dodgers of my life because they won the World Series. He had the absolute biggest hit, the home run in Game 7. I will always be cheering for Cody Bellinger. I'm glad he's gone. I just laughed at the Plashke stuff because comparing it to Shaq and Kobe as if Bellinger hadn't been an MVP, 6 seasons ago or whatever it was. Like, I don't know. I got a chuckle out of it.
Yeah, that's a bit of a stretch for me as well. And like you, I'm somebody like I was obviously pro Bellinger, and I thought I felt it got to the point like I felt bad for him because it wasn't necessarily like a lack of effort, right? Like it wasn't like he just didn't care anymore. It just wasn't working for whatever reason. And so maybe, we needed a change of scenery. But yeah, I mean, to compare it to the best shooting guard center combo in NBA history, that I'll have to sit on the sideline for that one.
And look, I think it's good for everybody because, to your point, it's not that I don't think do I think Bellinger cared? Of course he cared. Do I think, reading between the lines of some tweets, and this is just my own opinion, nothing source, did I feel like he maybe took all of the advice that the Dodgers were trying to give him as far as getting his offensive game back together? No, I don't think he did. I get the vibe that he was a little bit harder to work with from the hitting coach perspective than maybe some of the other guys were, which is hey, do you, buddy? But also don't complain to me when 2021 and 2022 go the way they do coming off shoulder surgery. So anyways, good for Cody Bellinger getting a cheer, getting the ovation. I thought the moment was great when he robs a home run. People start booing him and he kind of throws his arms up. And kudos to the Dodger fans for getting a pitch clock violation there against Bellinger as well. So let's talk stuck up and stuck down. This is a game we like to play. This time, instead of alternating, Matt, I'm just going to list off a bunch of guys and we'll rattle through these or storylines. And I say or storylines because the first one is a storyline. Stuck down, the umpiring in the 9th inning of Sunday's game for the Dodgers. Holy crap, Matt. Was this an embarrassing sequence for home plate umpire? The Dodgers ended up with the runner on first base. All 3 outs were recorded via strikeout. All 3 strikeouts were looking. All 3 strikeouts were on pitches well outside of the strike zone. I will add in that David Peralta struck out on a 2-2 pitch, 2 to 3 inches off the outside of the plate. Jason Hayward comes up next. 3-1 pitch in the same spot, called a strike, should have been ball 4. 3-2 pitch, 2 to 3 inches off the inside of the plate, called a strike. He strikes out. And then Freddie Freeman comes up on an 0-2 count. He takes a strike that is 2 to 3 inches below the zone and strikes out. So we've got 2 to 3 inches off one side, 2 to 3 inches off the other, and then 2 to 3 inches below. Stock down to that umpire.
And I mean, I'll take this a step further. I think stock down for umpiring so far this season, at least with Dodger games specifically, because that's where I would say 99% of my time is invested, it's been bad. And I'm somebody, people know, I'm somebody who is pro, human umpires. I'm not necessarily on board with bringing in the robots, but honestly, it's getting harder and harder by the day. I'm looking like a crazy person saying, no, leave these umpires who are calling the pitches way outside the zone. And that was rough. And umpires have bad days. I don't know what happened today because it's one thing to kind of make, 1 or 2 egregious calls in a game, right? 2 or 3 egregious calls in a game is extreme, but maybe you can live with that, get away with it if it didn't impact the result. This was a one-run game in the 9th inning. And like you said, the Peralta one, I'll cut him some slack. At least, it was semi-close. But, Hayward had 2 pitches called on him that were both not strikes, that were called for strikes. And so the stock, I think, like I said, I'll definitely for Sunday's game, way down. But I'll even say for the regular season, it's down. And again, real quick, once we're done here, or if you're listening to us on the podcast, head to our YouTube channel. We have Jason Hayward, Freddie Freeman, Dave Roberts, all talking about the strike zone.
Yeah. And to your point, if it happens once, so be it. And if it happens on the same spot, so be it. If it's 2 to 3 inches outside and that is a strike all day, then you live with it. The fact that it was 2 to 3 inches inside, 2 to 3 inches outside, and 2 to 3 inches low, the fact that it was the bottom of the 9th within a 1-run game, the fact that it was, basically 3 out of 4 batters and 4 times in 3 batters is absolutely ridiculous. All right, next up for me is stock up. It's a guy we've touched on, Max Muncy. Holy smokes, has this guy seemed to have turned things around. In the last 7 days, he has 5 home runs and 12 RBIs. He is 7 for 20. Are we ready to anoint Max Muncy as back, Matt?
Not yet. Not for me. I'm holding on this one. The Giants series was spectacular, and impressive and record setting for Muncy. But then we saw kind of some of the same trouble strikeouts against during the Cubs series. And so that's where my concern sort of lies. He did hit another home run. I think he might have had another like hard contact out or two during the series, but it certainly, there was a significant drop off from what we saw against the Giants to what we saw against the Cubs. And so I'm not fully there saying stock up on Muncy.
Yeah. 0 for 3 with a walk and 2 strikeouts today. 0 for 3 with 2 strikeouts and a walk yesterday. And then finally 2 for 4 in the first game against the Cubs. That one had the home run as well. So I think it looks more, I mean, obviously the power is there. Look, Trace Thompson had a 3 home run game, and that has proven to be somewhat of an outlier. I think it's safe to say. I think with Muncy, because I've been more optimistic about his performance and his ability to tap back into what made him great, I tend to believe something when I start to see it. And look, he might just be on an absolute heater and it all disappears pretty quickly. We know there are guys a la Chris Taylor who can just catch lightning in a bottle one moment and then be a nightmare the next. But I'm buying the Max Muncy stock. I've been buying it all along, so maybe there's some confirmation bias here, but I like what I'm seeing from Max Muncy. Stock down is a guy that I'm surprised, maybe his first appearance ever on stock down, Matt, and that's Freddie Freeman. 3 for his last 25, no extra base hits, and 9 strikeouts. He just seems to be swinging and missing a whole lot. Even that one at bat where he had all those foul balls and then he ends up taking a walk, like everybody was applauding it. And I'm like, holy crap, Freddie, how did you not hit like 6 of those foul balls on a line into a gap somewhere? He was just missing, thankfully stayed alive, obviously ends up taking the walk, but something off about Freddie Freeman, who historically is one of the most consistent guys we've got.
Yeah, I think if you in a vacuum, he's stocked down. But in terms of long-term concern, even as quick as like the Mets series, like I'm expecting him to get back on track. We've seen this with Freeman. I think, well, I don't want to say in the past because it's only been one season with the Dodgers, but last year I felt like he went through maybe a 3 to 4 game stretch where he wasn't hitting all of a sudden, and I don't think the strikeouts were necessarily as high as what we saw, especially in one game. It definitely wasn't, because I think the last time he had 4 strikeouts in a game was against the Dodgers, coincidentally, I think in the 2021 NLCS. So stock down for now, yes, but I anticipate him quickly riding the ship. By a week from tonight, I think we'll be saying Freddie Freeman is back.
Yeah, I agree. Look, I'm buying the stock. If it's down a little bit, if I'm buying the dip on Freddie Freeman, not worried at all. Just a weird stretch for him. Stock up. A guy who I would have been surprised to hear myself say stock up a week ago. Brusdar Graterol. 3 straight scoreless appearances for him. Gets the final out on Tuesday in a jam. Perfect inning Friday with the strikeout. He gets 4 outs today with 3 strikeouts. The swing and miss, I won't say is back because it's never really been there. But Graterol, I've been impressed, Matt, by what I've seen. Again, I'm not trying to overreact to the positive or the negative if we're talking about 2 1/3 innings or whatever, 2 2/3, I believe, for Graterol. But there are signs that are positive. There's some encouragement here, I guess, with Graterol from a guy that I was really, really concerned with 8 to 10 days ago.
Yeah, I agree with you. And, peeling the curtain back a little bit for our viewers and listeners, I try to tell you and Scott, don't worry about Bazooka. He'll be fine. He's even fielding his position the way Dave Roberts said he's capable of doing. Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think he is who he is. Like that, he's not gonna. I don't think he's all of a sudden going to become this huge strikeout pitcher. Unfortunately, unfortunately for the Dodgers and for him, because if he were, like, they would have a pretty good answer at closer at that point. But I think he's capable of being an effective relief pitcher for them in kind of his own way.
Yeah, I agree. All right, another stock up here, and then we've got a few stock downs to close it. Julio Urias. I know it's kind of a weird one to be saying this today on a day that they lost on Sunday, in which 3 runs come on the board while he's out there. The first one was unearned thanks to an error by Miguel Vargas, and then 2 home runs the last 2 batters that he faces. Kind of a weird one. There's an argument to be made that maybe he shouldn't have been out there for both or at least one of those 2 batters as he neared 100 pitches, but he was. And yet, despite that, 23 2/3 inning pitched, 1.9 ERA on the season. He's got 26 strikeouts and just 3 walks. I know he has critics. I know he has doubters. They're probably in our comments right now, Matt. The guy just continues to produce and be dominant despite what any of the underlying metrics seem to say. I'm a metrics guy. you're an eye test guy. There is a world where those two things come together. I think Julio is one of those guys where if you just keep outperforming and outperforming and outperforming, at some point, it might not be you. It might just be your fit with the metrics. So Julio stock up, because even on a day when he wasn't his best, the guy was has been all season really, really good.
Yeah. And, I mean, one of the home runs he gave up was to Patrick Wisdom, who had a home run every game in the series. So it's not like, it was completely out of the blue per se. But I agree with you. And, with Julio, I think if, fast forwarding or rewinding a playoff scenario, hey, he's starting game one, you're more than comfortable with that. Right. And so to me, like he'll still have his one or two clunkers in the year. He might have a start that is, I'm sure that is worse than this one at some point, just because it happens to the best of them. But then you'll look at his statistics at the end of the season, and he's going to be up there, among the NL leaders, if not baseball leaders. And, I agree with you. I think just, he's a very good pitcher. For whatever reason, the metrics don't love him. But, you've been pounding the table that he's arguably better, if not better, than Walker Buehler for multiple years. And, unfortunately, in Buehler's case, an injury has, robbed the opportunity to have a full debate. But he's definitely been on, Urias has been on the incline, trending up.
I mean, look, it's the, as my dad used to say, even a blind squirrel finds a nut every once in a while. Every once in a while, I have a take that I feel good about more than 2 weeks later. Julio over Walker Buehler, as of 2 or 3 years ago, whenever we were having that debate, is one of them, and I feel good about it. Again, Buehler hasn't been able to pitch. He struggled before getting Tommy John. He was probably injured during that time, so I'm not going to hold that against him, but Julio continues to just pitch and pitch and pitch and be very, very good. All right, a few more stock downs here before we get to questions. I see some folks throwing questions in the chat. Thank you. Hold on to those. We're going to put up a bar on the bottom that says questions in about 5 or 10 minutes. Throw those in the chat. We'll get to them there. Chris Taylor, briefly, 13 at-bats this week, 2 home runs. Hey, Jeff, why is that stock down? 2 home runs in a week? That's good for Chris Taylor. Well, those are his only 2 hits, and he struck out in more than 50% of his at-bats. I don't know. I don't understand how a guy has 2 home runs in 13 at-bats and 7 strikeouts. Like, how you can look so helpless one moment and then hit an absolute laser for a home run the next. It's the Chris Taylor experience, though.
Well, to quote Blake, our good friend Blake, he's Chris Taylor is the new Joey Gallo, if you will. Like that's,
I like that one because Blake will be offended by that.
That's kind of where, things are with Taylor. I mean, it's similar to Bellinger. Like I feel like he's working, I feel bad for him because you could see it. Like he's wearing it on his face. I mean, I think he just feels lost out there. And he knows he's searching for a feel that, he might have had it for a game or two or a swing or two, and he just can't seem to get any sort of consistency with it. I mean, it's just an unfortunate reality. And, what's going to be interesting to see is if he doesn't necessarily get back on track, a contract that's sort of, Blake, CT 3-2 outcomes. If he doesn't get back on track, Taylor's contract, it's going to end up looking, a lot different than what everybody thought at the time that he signed it.
Yeah, I agree with you. A stock up and a stock down all in one, Matt. This is my first, and it's a James Outman edition. So I'm going to say this. I'm going to say stock up is James Outman against left-handed pitchers. Matt, the people told us that the man couldn't hit left-handed pitchers. He's 2 for 6 with 5 walks in 11 plate appearances against lefties. So he has reached base in 7 of 11 plate appearances against left-handers. No platoon for James Outman. And yet, with that said, in his last 7 days, he started to cool off. 4 for 19, 5 strikeouts and 3 walks. So kind of a roller coaster, but we expected that. Nobody's expecting James Outman to have an OPS over 1,000. We think he's going to settle in to be like a 250, 260 hitter with some power and a lot of strikeout. And that's going to be more than enough and content. Now, I did think this was interesting, Matt. FanDuel has him down to plus 500 for National League Rookie of the Year. That's the second best odds in the National League behind Corbin Carroll, ahead of Jordan Walker and Kodai Senga. So are you buying or selling your James Outman for National League Rookie of the Year stock?
Oh man, that's tough. I'll sell that because I don't. Some of it is, I think, team related, and like I discussed at the top of the show, I'm concerned about the direction the Dodgers are sort of heading in. And so, if they're not necessarily at the level that people expect them to be, unless James Outman is having an unbelievable season, he's not going to get as much recognition as he should. Now, if the Dodgers get on a significant hot streak and James Outman is part of that, then I think we'll see, NL Rookie of the Year campaign starting up again. But yeah, I think you framed this one perfectly in terms of stock up and stock down. I'm glad he's getting opportunities against left-handed pitchers because, it's been, I think, a fair criticism of the Dodgers of, hey, like, not everybody needs to be a platoon player. Like, you don't need to be the San Francisco Giants who have one lineup one day and a completely new lineup the next day. Like, give him a chance. I mean, especially with some of these younger guys who haven't been up yet. If it's a veteran who, after 10 years, you can look at, oh, yeah, he's never hit left-handed pitching. I completely get that. But when it's a rookie, a younger player, a prospect, give him a chance.
Yeah, I love how Dave Roberts said, I think it was yesterday, hey, we don't think James Outman is a platoon player. And it's like, sure you don't. That's why you carried like 7 outfielders on the opening day roster and didn't play him against the lefties until everybody started getting to hurt. So kind of a funny deal there. Another down briefly, Jason Hayward. Look, he started off the season great. He's 0 for his last 9 with 5 strikeouts and a walk. Not great from him. And I will do one more minor up. I'm happy for Michael Grove. Everybody knows I'm biased. I really like the guy, but I'm happy for him. I felt like he got unlucky in his first start. I felt like he got kind of hung out to dry in his second start on a day where he wasn't very good, to be honest. But I'm glad that in his third start, he was able to pitch really, really well, get the results. The ERA is still ugly, but stock up for Michael Grove, stock down for Jason Hayward, a couple minor ones there.
Yeah, I mean, with Hayward, I think Hayward's situation is just, what were your expectations going into the season? Yeah. I personally wasn't expecting much. And so when he kind of was hitting the early home runs, when he was doing well in spring training, I thought, great, like, this is something that maybe you weren't necessarily counting on. It's just going to be kind of extra production. I will say still, like, he's impressed me with how well he's played the outfield. I thought, particularly center field. And your other one, Michael Grove. Yeah, I think even Michael Grove's first start was fine. Especially considering, like I said, we learned at the time that he was sick. It has since been disclosed that it was strep throat. And so pitching through that, dealing with that, not being able to maybe prepare as you normally would, I think, he had a good start, all things considered. This last one against the Cubs, I think, was obviously even better. And so, hopefully it'll be more in line of what Grove will be giving the Dodgers because, Tony Gonsolin, as we've covered, his timeline has been pushed back into May. It's still unclear. I think, that may still be a little bit optimistic if it's early May type thing. So, Grove and Pepio hasn't picked up a baseball yet. So, Grove could be making more starts than they first believed when the season began.
Yeah, and Andre Jackson, the other guy everyone was calling for, had a rough outing himself the other night. So not expecting anything there. Let's get to some questions. Start throwing those in the chat, the live comments. We appreciate those. If you put question in all caps at the beginning, that'll help me to be able to identify those. So throw those in the chat. We'll get to them. Matt, as they do, let me throw you a couple rapid fire bullpen facts that I found to be very interesting. 2 bad ones and 1 good one. On the bad side, Yency Almonte has a whip, walks and hits per inning pitched of 2.00. That's not very good. Alex Vesia's is 2.79. He's allowing almost 3 base runners per inning pitched. Not good for Alex Vesia. On the positive side, how about this? Phil Bickford, 6 1/3 innings pitched, 12 strikeouts. Bickford striking out almost 2 guys per inning. So good stuff there. Some rapid fire stuff. Let's get to some of these questions here. The other Fishing Channel asked question: do you think the Dodgers make any big moves midseason? Friedman should talk with Pelinka for tips and tricks. P.S. Hell of a win today for the Lakes. Yes, go Lakers. Shout out to Austin Reeves and Rui Hachimura for holding it down. I'll say this. I hope Andrew Friedman does not talk to Rob Pelinka. Rob Pelinka made a couple nice moves at the deadline and was pretty much been a disaster other than that, my view. But do you think, Matt, the Dodgers make any big moves in the middle of this season?
I don't. And there's my main reason is I'm concerned about where the team is going to be record-wise come the trade deadline. Andrew Friedman has been open about not enjoying the trade deadline. It certainly hasn't prevented him from being active and making big moves, but he doesn't love it. And I think the Dodgers are going to be sort of in a unique position this year if they are 500 or around 500 at the trade deadline. And, let's say Friedman's trying to acquire a starting pitcher or a shortstop. The team there, first of all, I think teams negotiating with the Dodgers drive a hard bargain with them to begin with. And I think now if it's a position a premium position or premium need for the Dodgers, they're going to look at it and say, well, okay, you want our all-star caliber shortstop. Well, we want XYZ, and we can ask you for this, because if not, you're relying on, Miguel Rojas and Chris Taylor, and short of them sort of turning it around, like, what is Friedman supposed to say? Like, no, actually, we're actually fine with our defensive hitting, our defensive minded shortstop. Like, it could just be a tough scenario for him to pull off a big move.
Yeah, I'll disagree. I think the Dodgers do. I think the Dodgers have so many guys at the upper levels of the minor leagues who are knocking on the door of being on the 40-man, or who are already on the 40-man when it comes to guys like Eddys Leonard, Yorby Vivas, those types, that I think the Dodgers, to some degree, have to make a move at some point. They have to package some of these guys and go condense, 3 or 4 of those assets and into 1 or 2 guys who are team controlled for the next few years. So I think the Dodgers do make a big move. Look, a bunch of teams make the playoffs. The Dodgers are going to be in the playoff hunt almost assuredly. There are 2 wild card spots outside of the division lead. As we've said, the Padres are worse than the Dodgers right now. The Diamondbacks are a game up. I think the Dodgers finish ahead of the Diamondbacks. I think the Padres are the competition. So it's not like they're starting from a disadvantage and they're already 3 or 4 games into a hole. So I think they're going to be right in the thick of it. I think the Dodgers need to make some sort of moves just from a roster construction perspective. But I also think, unlike some years in the past, they have real tangible needs. It's not like you look at the roster and say, well, they could use some help, but they have starters everywhere. I mean, they desperately need a shortstop. I think they could go get one of those. They have tons of holes in the outfield. I mean, basically, left field is a total wasteland at the moment. I think you pencil James Outman into either left field or center field. You pencil Mookie Betts into right field until they make him their shortstop. And then you figure out left field. So I think if left field and shortstop are both open, if the bullpen is open, there are tons of holes on the roster that they could go and try to fill if Trace Thompson and if Jason Hayward and if those types of guys don't end up panning out. So I actually think the Dodgers do make a big move, but I think it's going to be close to the deadline, because until then, I don't think you're going to have teams necessarily making sort of a ready to make moves yet. David asked a similar question. Do you think there's any chance we make a big splash in the free agency market? Not in the middle of the season. I mean, there's nobody left to make a big splash in. Next year, I think Matt and I are aligned that the Dodgers are going to try as hard as they can to make a big splash with a certain guy who plays in Anaheim. But that's a conversation for another day. TQT. I always mispronounce this one. Question: JD Martinez walking a career low 4%, striking out 36%. His bat looks slow. Why is he getting such a pass? He just isn't good enough to warrant everyday DH at bats. I'll answer briefly, Matt. The reason he's getting a pass is because he hasn't been terrible, and they have other guys who have been terrible. The 294 on base percentage isn't awesome. The 475 slugging percentage is pretty good. 770 OPS, not terrible. He's got 7 doubles, 2 triples. The strikeout rate isn't awesome, but if JD Martinez has OPS hovering around 800 compared to some of the other guys they have, I mean, we're just not going to talk about it. I think if they move him down the order, you're not going to complain, because who else are you going to put at DH? Like, on days that Will Smith can't catch, yes, he should be DHing. We all agree on that, but it's not like Jason Hayward or Trace Thompson. Like, they have 5 outfielders for 3 spots, and one of those guys is losing at bats to JD. I think the 800 OPS, you don't love it for the money they spent. You don't love it as a DH only guy, but the reason he's getting a pass is because there's lots of guys who are worse than him.
Yeah, I think JD got off to a slow start, and criticism was kind of starting to come his way. And then he went on a nice little hitting streak with, some extra base hits and the triples, like you mentioned. I think my biggest issue, though, still with the signing is the Dodgers, the way they've constructed their roster over the past few years, since the DH was adopted in the National League, was to rotate it amongst players. And so I don't know if, at this point signing, like I said, JD Martinez at this point in his career to be an everyday DH, because like you said, now it basically has eliminated Will Smith from more or less like ever being a DH. I mean, Dave Roberts hasn't flat out said that, but that's been the case so far. I mean, maybe there'll be 5 games at the end of the year that JD Martinez didn't play in. So I think that is kind of the bigger issue, as opposed to, his walk rate, his strikeout rate. Because, I mean, I think Dodgers probably knew more or less what that was going to be going into it.
Yeah. Question from Jason here, who met Matt, said the highlight of his trip, besides seeing 2 wins, was meeting Matt. I love this question. In all seriousness, is $44 at all reasonable for a Dodgers toque, T-O-Q-U-E, at the stadium when it's 48 degrees? Matt, I had to Google what that is. It's a beanie. That's a Canadian way to say beanie, I learned. $60 Canadian for a Dodgers beanie. It's 48 degrees. I mean, I bought a spring training hat this year that I was very excited about. This cost me $50 US. Hats are just absurdly priced. If Blake's still in the chat, I'm sure he has a strong opinion here. He would say, go for it. Definitely worth it. Matt, did you know what a toque was prior to this moment?
I did not. So seeing the price and then seeing that word, I thought it was going to be some sort of like sweatshirt, sweater,
I thought it was a
hoodie,
food item at
jacket.
first. Gonna be honest.
Okay. Yeah, no, I thought clothing. So for beanie, it's not reasonable, but I will say, like, it was freezing a few nights at Dodger State, like legitimately freezing. And I know it may not be Jeff standard freezing, but for us in Southern California, it was miserable. So although that's not reasonable, I would say it may have been necessary if it was one of those nights where it felt, frigid out there.
Yeah, I think he said down below he ended up going with a blanket. So there you go. Probably a more worthwhile investment there. Lewis asks, do you think Vivas makes it up? He is hot now and seems to offer lots of what the Dodgers need. That's your beat, Vivas. I am surprised that there haven't been more conversations about a guy like your beat, Vivas, because he's already on the 40-man roster. He just turned 22 years old. The caveat is he's played 8 games at Double-A. So it's kind of the Diego Cartaya thing. He spent 2021 and 22 in High A. Yes, he's off to a hot start. The OPS is like 1,200 or something like that. But that's in 8 games as a 22-year-old at Double-A. So that would be my concern with a guy like that. It's just a matter of, you've got to see it more. I also don't believe he has played shortstop. I could be wrong on that, but he played second base in his time at Double-A. So he doesn't necessarily answer the shortstop question. I think that would be the issue. I believe Eddie's Leonard, I would have to double check this. I believe Eddie's Leonard is the guy in the 40-man who has played a little bit more shortstop. Matt, anything to add there?
No, I'm pretty sure you have that correctly. And so that's pretty much where I would fall. I mean, look, if the trade deadline comes and goes without the Dodgers able to add any sort of impact infielder, then maybe at that point, if one of these two, whether Vivas or Leonard, have put together a strong first half, strong 60-ish% of the season, then maybe they get called up late in the year to kind of see what they can do. And I think, but what we'll see and what may be the first kind of tell or tip is if or when one or both get promoted to OKC at any point this year.
Yeah, and Leonard, I did look it up. Leonard is playing shortstop this year. He's also hitting, not hitting right now at the moment. So you've got one guy playing shortstop but not hitting, and a guy playing second base who is hitting, but both at Double-A, both very young. So time to see there. David asks, do you think if we don't make a big move, it's because we are going after Shohei? I don't think those two things would be related personally. If anything, I think you could justify making a big move for a guy who has a few years of team control because you want to have cost-controlled assets alongside Shohei Ohtani, knowing that you can't go out and spend a bunch of money on proven commodities elsewhere. So I personally can't imagine. I mean, I'll put it this way. They're not going to go trade for a guy who's making $30 million a year for the next few years. I do think that, but those type of guys don't tend to get traded to begin with. So I think the Ohtani pursuit is going to be in mind, but because he's a free agent and you won't have to trade for him, I don't think those two are necessarily totally correlated. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. And I agree. And I think another factor too is they're already over the luxury tax threshold. So it's not like they're still trying to tiptoe and stay below it. So, I mean, if there's somebody there who's making, 15 to 18 million, who's an impact player, like, I don't think that they'll hesitate. I don't think the reason they may potentially hesitate would be because of what their financial outlook moving forward. Because, I mean, frankly, it's already shot with what they did, but I'll leave that for another time.
It's a conversation for another day. Elise asks, are the Dodgers going to regret not signing Cody Bellinger, Matt? What do you think?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think Bellinger can end up having an okay career, but I don't see him, really getting back to the height of it the way he was, certainly as a rookie. And, even his MVP year, like, not to knock on him, just objectively speaking, that second half of his MVP year, the decline, that was when the decline, sort of started. So yeah, I don't think there's going to necessarily be too much regret other than, he's a fun personality to kind of have around.
Look, I was the guy saying start Outman over Cody Bellinger at the end of last season. So I am having no regrets with how things have played out. THP asks a really good question. Matt, concerned with how often guys are running on the Dodger pitchers? Let me rephrase this. How freaking concerned are you about the fact that everybody is running all over the Dodgers? We thought maybe it was just the Diamondbacks, this weird team with tons of speed who were going to try crazy things. Then the Cubs did the exact same thing. Scale of 1 to 10. I mean, are we at a 9.5 with the base running against the Dodgers?
I'm going to say I'm at a 10, and I'm going to factor in that the Dodgers aren't running themselves.
Yeah, it's weird.
And, I think the Diamondbacks sort of exploited it, and the Cubs now did it, like you said. And so the book is out, and when teams, are seeing other teams have success, they're going to try it too. And odds are they're probably going to also have success, because whether it's, Dodgers pitchers not doing a good enough job holding them, whether it's the catcher pop time, whatever the case is, like, it's just kind of a bad situation all around. And then again, I mean, I know this question wasn't asked, but the Dodgers aren't stealing bases, and that's a concern. And some of it is their personnel. They don't have a bunch of burners. I would like to see maybe Mookie running a little bit more if and when he does get on base. But they're just not equipped that way. And so it's sort of, it makes you look at, I think at least me, it makes me look at the Trey Turner free agency contract, a little differently. And again, I know that, I think he was happy to, if the Phillies weren't, the East Coast thing, I think was a little bit blown out of proportion, but I think the Phillies are a good situation for him in terms of still being on a contender back at the East Coast.
Yeah. One thing I'll say, Trey Turner actually not stealing that many bags. He only has 3 steals this year,
Fair.
But I only know that because he's on my fantasy team, and I'm incredibly disappointed in the performance so far. But yeah, I mean, I think, look, the rules changed. The bases are bigger. The pickoffs are limited, yada, yada, yada. So everybody was sort of blind. Like, does this mean guys are going to steal a lot? Should we try stealing a lot? It feels like the Dodgers were going to let this settle for the first couple of weeks. I'll be curious to see a month from now. Are they running more? Are they doing a better job of holding people on? Once sort of the data is out there, it's like, holy crap, stolen bases are 25% more successful than they were a year ago. Now the math has changed. This is actually mathematically a good decision, whereas historically it has been a bad decision. A couple more. Jonathan asks quickly, any chance they remove Mookie Betts from the leadoff spot? He would fit better hitting second or third hole, in my opinion. I imagine you're just sort of moving Freddie Freeman back and then moving Will Smith back. Do you have somebody else that you would like to sort of cram into that top spot to move everybody back, or is the top of the order not the issue for you, Matt?
Yeah, that's the biggest thing is if it's not Mookie, who are you putting in the leadoff spot? I will say last year's, it's a moot point now, but last year's team, for instance, I thought in an ideal world, when Mookie still cared about batting leadoff, he would have been okay hitting second so that Trey Turner could hit first, hopefully get on base, hopefully steal a base, and then he's in scoring position for Mookie and Freeman right after. But, Mookie wanted to be leadoff. He said in spring training this year, he actually doesn't care about that anymore. Unfortunately, the Dodgers, it's all fine and well. The Dodgers don't have anybody to replace them with anyway, so it doesn't really matter.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't think it's the issue at the top of the lineup. I would advocate for maybe moving a guy like JD Martinez down to the 6 or 7 hole and moving a guy like James Outman potentially up, just based on how he's hitting. But I think Mookie, Freddie, Will, Muncy as a first 4 is good. You want those guys getting in many at-bats as humanly possible. And then Outman, Vargas, JD Martinez in some order. Again, I like that first 7. And then if David Peralta's playing at 8, that's not the worst thing in the world, even as bad as he's been hitting. And then you just sort of take your lumps with either Chris Taylor or Miguel Rojas playing at shortstop. So that's where I would leave it. So I would leave him in the leadoff spot and acknowledge that your issue is in the 8 and 9 hole and not at the number 1 hole. So, well, Matt, with that, that'll do it. Dodgers Mets this week. I mean, are we excited? Dodgers Mets early in the week? Do we feel like this is the Mets aren't doing very well? So, the Dodgers have that going for them. Let's see, as we record this, Mets are 10-6. So excuse me. They've won 4 in a row at this point. They started out struggling, but they've now won 4 in a row. So 10-6 Mets against the 8-8 Dodgers. Are we excited about that one, Matt?
I'm interested in it.
Okay.
I'm not necessarily excited. I'm interested to see how this series is going to go for multiple reasons. One of them being that Scherzer's starting Wednesday because he was pushed back, I think, 2 or 3 days. And so now he's going to get the ball in the series finale. And I'm fairly certain this is going to be his first start back at Dodger Stadium since he was pitching for the Dodgers. So I think that'll be interesting. With it being, though, a 12-10 start in LA, he's not going to get the full, veracity. Again, apologies to Scott's Astros that they, the treatment they received But
Yeah.
it'll still be interesting to see the fans that do show up for that early afternoon game, what kind of treatment they give Scherzer, because he had some interesting comments on his way out the door.
Yeah, and Thor against the Mets in that game as well.
Yeah.
David Peterson taking them out for the Mets tomorrow against the Dodgers. Shout out to the University of Oregon grad David Peterson. Gotta get a go Ducks when we can there. But we got Dustin May on the mound for the Dodgers, and then you got Kershaw versus Miguel, who's been good on Tuesday night as well. So should be a fun 3-game set there. And then it's back with the Cubs. More Cubs action. If you weren't already sick of the Cubs, the Dodgers travel to Chicago to play them next week. So folks, we appreciate you joining us. As always, let me remind you that every Tuesday and Friday night, we are doing live watch parties over on Playback. You can find it very easily. Playback.tv/DodgerBlue1958. Playback.tv/DodgerBlue1958. That Tuesday night Kershaw game, we will be doing a live watch party. All you've got to do is sign in with your TV provider. Other than that, it is entirely free. We all get to watch a stream together. You'll get commentary from myself and Scott Gearman, maybe some special appearances from Matt Moreno, Blake Williams, those type of folks throughout. So join us for that. And then Friday's doing the same thing. And then right here on YouTube, we have live post-game shows every Tuesday and Friday. So we hope you can join us for that. Matt mentioned there is a ton of great content up on the YouTube page. So Dodger Blue 1958 post-game interviews from today, Dave Roberts and others commenting on the umpiring decisions, as well as all the latest news you need. So Dodger Blue 1958 on YouTube. Make sure you subscribe, ring the notification bell. We would greatly appreciate that. That's Matt Moreno. My name is Jeff Spiegel. As always, enjoy the rest of your day and go Dodgers.